Edwin Cannistraci here. I'm back, this time to talk about a movie, something I do from time to time. Enjoying a Jaeger and club soda. I don't know if that's a real drink, but I made it a real drink and I enjoy it. It's a good later in the evening beverage. And it is later in the evening, which is a perfect time to discuss this movie, Thief, because it's a very nocturnal film and often cited as one. Here we go. Here's the Criterion Collection edition that I have. Whoa, look at that crazy lighting. That crazy lighting all over. It's just like the opening sequence. This nocturnal, beautiful lighting. Anyway, great, amazing edition. There you go, 2 discs. If you're a Thief fan, you definitely need to own the Criterion Collection edition. And yes, this is not only my favorite Michael Mann film, it's one of my favorite films of all time. Maybe, yeah, I would say this is like in my top 10 favorite films. It's a movie I usually watch at least, I usually watch Thief like once a year. And I have ever since I first got into it. I think like going back to my late 20s was the first time I saw it. And I'm going to get into a lot of reasons why I connect with this film on a lot of personal levels when I discuss what's stated in the thumbnail and what I think Thief has to say about those things, individuality and method. More on that later. But to give you a little background, in case you're like, what the hell's Michael Mann's Thief? For some reason, you decide to click on this video and you don't know what Thief is. It's Michael Mann's theatrical feature debut from 1981, Thief, starring James Caan as the Thief, Frank the Thief. The film, it was a modest hit at the time. It made a small profit, but also had widespread critical acclaim throughout the world, especially Europe. Europe really liked it a lot. And a lot of times people cite it as like a foreshadowing of Heat, which of course Heat is usually thought of as Michael Mann's grand opus. And that is a great film. A little grandiose at times for my taste, but it is a great film. But in my opinion, Thief is the better film, both objectively and subjectively. To me, Michael Mann hit it out of the park. His first film is still his best film. I don't think he ever topped Thief. Manhunter's great, kind of came close, but still not as great as Thief. It's a film that really holds up and it still has an edge and still seems very fresh and modern to this day, both written and directed by Michael Mann, being a true auteur. It was based on The Home Invaders, Confessions of a Cat Burglar, which was a 1975 true crime memoir written by, well, the pseudonym was Frank Hoheimer. So it was by Frank Hoheimer, and the character Frank, Thief, obviously comes from Frank Hoheimer. And this is what Thief is based on. So Michael Mann adapted this book into the screenplay. However, it's actually a little more complicated than that, because even though from a story standpoint, and obviously the cat burglar stuff and the broad strokes of the memoir are carried over into this story, there was another source of inspiration, even though not cited officially, but definitely bled into this project, which is this book, Edward Bunker's No Beast So Fierce. Ed Bunker, a notorious thief, criminal, turned novelist. Actually, he wrote this book while he was serving one of his many prison sentences. Dustin Hoffman acquired the rights to the book. He actually wanted it to be his directorial debut and would eventually become the movie Straight Time, another amazing movie and another one of my favorite movies. Now, Straight Time has a very interesting connection to Thief. So Dustin Hoffman, who's amazing in this role. Actually, I think Thief is James Caan's best role, and I think this is Dustin Hoffman's best role. And very different from what you would expect from Dustin Hoffman. You wouldn't imagine him playing this hard and tough, streetwise thief, but he does it. He's actually very effective and very scary in the role. In some ways, scarier than James Caan's not really scary. He's passionate and emotional, whereas Dustin brings this real coldness to the character, and it's very effective. It's an amazing movie. So anyway, Dustin was working with Ed Bunker himself. Edward Bunker was adapting his own book into a screenplay, but there was a certain point where they thought, hey, we should probably bring in an actual screenwriter by trade that come in and do a pass and rewrite it. This led them to employ a young Michael Mann, who was at that point primarily a TV writer and director, and they brought him in, and for 3 months, he worked alongside Edward Bunker, rewriting what would become Straight Time. Now, eventually, Dustin Hoffman decided not to direct it. They brought in another director. That director brought in other writers, and Michael Mann's draft got rewritten. And a story that I talked about in another video, sometimes writers get screwed over, especially if they're a middle writer. And Michael Mann was a middle writer between Edward Bunker and the two writers that the director brought in. And as a result, Michael Mann did not get credit. He is not credited as a writer on Straight Time, although his fingerprints are all over it. You watch this and it feels like a Michael Mann film in a lot of ways. This experience definitely planted the seeds of what would become Thief. Also, while he was working with Ed Bunker and him went to Folsom Prison. They met with a lot of the inmates there, and Michael Mann really got to know what the whole prison mentality, and that played into not only a television movie that he would direct to a lot of acclaim called The Jericho Mile the following year, but this also all was used later in Thief because the character of Frank is an ex-con. There's a lot going on about his psychology because he was in prison. A lot of this feels like it's coming directly from Michael Mann's direct interaction not only with Edward Bunker, but with the various inmates that he had interviewed and talked with at Folsom Prison. And there's a lot of characteristics of Edward Bunker that I feel are in this character of Frank. So he's essentially a combination of Edward Bunker and this cap burglar Frank character from the book that it's officially based on. Usually when people talk about Thief, they talk about the style, and I'll talk a little bit about the style, but I don't want this video to be primarily about the style because that's kind of what everyone talks about. Michael Mann, he came out of the gate with a really defined style, and you could say that he essentially kind of created the 1980s action film neo-noir crime thriller aesthetic of the 80s is all created instantly in this film. It doesn't feel like a 70s film. It has some of that grit like a lot of early 80s cinema has, where there's still a little hangover of the 70s naturalism and grit, but there's also this slick modernism that's being brought in. Not unlike another film based in Chicago from the early 80s that I made a video about, Risky Business. I feel Thief and Risky Business, despite being different genres and different kinds of films, I feel from a stylistic standpoint, they are both bringing in this nocturnal, highly stylized, modern approach to cinema that was a departure from the more naturalistic look of 70s films. And I guess something about that aesthetic really appeals to me. This would be all over Miami Vice, which Michael Mann was an executive producer of. And, the famous scene from the pilot where Sonny and Rico are driving along to In the Air Tonight, also used in Risky Business. So a lot of connections there. But that nighttime drive of them and the city lights all around them and just that vibe, that moody nocturnal vibe, even though Michael Mann didn't actually direct the pilot, you could feel his influence, and just like Thief, it created the whole look and feel of what would become mainstream 80s cinema. And I feel it's also it's come back in the past 20 years. A lot of indie films like this film, Drive, a great film starring Ryan Gosling, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn. This film is all about that nocturnal, atmospheric, driving around in the dead of night kind of vibe. And especially the opening scene, which I think is the best scene in the movie, which to me is a clear homage to the opening of Thief, which also opens with a methodically and perfectly executed crime, in which you see, in both films, you see how the protagonist is a master at what he does. In addition to James Caan, who's amazing, and to me it's his best role he ever did, even better than Sonny in The Godfather. But Tuesday Weld, who plays his love interest in this film, is great. One of my favorite scenes is that scene together between them in the diner. Really great dialogue there, great performances. And I also think this is Michael Mann's strongest dialogue in any of his scripts. It has a real Elmer Leonard kind of quality, where it really feels like the way people really talk to each other. And there's all these little digressions and little weird moments from James Caan. As a criminal, he's a perfectionist, but as a human being, he's this very flawed, fucked up guy who doesn't really know how to interact with people or say things the right way. And this is perfectly captured in his dialogue and in the performance. So both a combination of writing and performance. I'm also a big fan of Robert Prosky, great character actor, also great in Christine, another one of my favorite movies, Christine. He plays the gangster Leo, who's the main antagonist. Also, I feel an inspiration on Albert Brooks's gangster character in Drive. I definitely see a connection there as well. And he's great. The whole cast is great. James Belushi's great as part of Frank's team. You have an amazing score by Tangerine Dream, one of my favorite soundtracks to write to. This is another connection to Risky Business because Tangerine Dream create original music, wonderful original music in both films. But the directors both made use of previously recorded music from Tangerine Dream's greatest non-soundtrack album, Force Majeure, and they gave them new titles and kind of a new context. So the soundtracks, they're definitely very connected. Two of my favorite soundtracks ever, and I write to Tangerine Dream quite a bit in my own writing because I'm also a screenwriter. The Thief soundtrack is definitely one of the soundtracks I write to the most. Many years later, Michael Mann said that he wished he went with his original plan, which was to make the whole soundtrack be blues music because it was Chicago. He thought it should all have local blues music. But I respectfully disagree. I think his instinct to not do that back in 1981 was the right instinct. And although you do get bits of that, like there's a scene where Frank goes into a blues establishment, and yeah, there's a blues band playing, as you should hear, and they sound like a legit local Chicago blues band. And so you should hear a little bit of that when they actually go to those places. But I think the synthesizer, minimalistic, modern soundtrack just creates a different atmosphere, and I also think it plays more into the theme. I mean, what would it say if this movie was wallpapered with blues music? It would just say, hey, we're in Chicago, Chicago, the blues, and it wouldn't really say anything about what's going on screen. Whereas Tangerine Dream, it's like we get into the inner world. We get into an inner world, not just the inner world, but also the external world of machines and tools and all the things that Frank is using to execute these perfectly rendered robberies. And he's a safecracker, and a lot of times he's using these tools to break into the safe. And the Tangerine Dream music just really brings out a quality to the mechanism of it. And this goes into method. Frank is presented right out of the gate from the first sequence. Frank is presented as like the top of his craft. Like it's a real craft. It's not like he's some low criminal. He's a craftsman and he's exceptional at what he does. In the directing, the music, James Caan's performance, and just the way everything's sequenced, it's riveting. It's exciting. It puts you right there. Frank built this whole life for himself where he's the best at what he does, and he forms this whole system, and he has his fronts, he has the used car lot and all this stuff, and everything's kind of perfect. However, the flip side to that is that he doesn't have a serious romantic relationship, at least not at the start of the film, and he doesn't have a family, and he's middle-aged now, and he feels that vacuum, he feels that hole, and so via Tuesday Weld's character, he wants to create that life for himself. And in his desire to get this life, he breaks his own rule and starts working for the gangster, Leo the gangster. Beforehand, he was an individual, always just working for himself, his own business. He set up his heist. He had his team. He went in. He got the stuff. He sold it. He got the money. He put it back into his own businesses and fronts. It was this perfect system, this perfect ecosystem of crime that he created. But this desire to get this life and also to fulfill this promise of an inmate mentor of his from prison who is dying, who wants to be released from prison, who's played by Willie Nelson, who I'm a big fan of. And between that and his desire for a family, he relents. He concedes to Leo and starts working for him. Leo starts planning the crimes. It's essentially like the small company gives into the corporation. And this is the thing. This is the pact, the Faustian pact. Once you are now in debt to someone else, you can't be your own man. This other person, Leo, now has him on a leash. And this becomes the driving conflict and engine of the film, especially in the second half. And ultimately, Frank decides that he has to destroy everything. He has to destroy this life that he created, this dream that he created in order to break free and reestablish himself as who he is, I remember the very first time I watched this film at the end, I remember thinking, because I was still young and I didn't entirely, I loved the film and I got it on certain levels, but I didn't entirely get the third act. There was part of me that was like, Frank, this is a little extreme. Like, can't you just send your wife away for like a few months and just take care of Leo and then just like get it all back together again? Like once you take him out? Like it just seemed kind of extreme. This whole like, you're done. I'm no longer married. I'm blowing up everything. It seemed a little extreme. I didn't entirely get it. But over the years, as I got older and found sometimes balancing certain things in my life with what I do well, I started to understand. I start to understand that sometimes no matter how much you might love a person and you want things to work out, but if you feel like it's destroying who you are in this system that you've created for yourself, where you get to do what you do best to survive, I started to understand it more. I start to understand the psychology of it more. Not saying it's not extreme, but Frank is fucked up from prison. And as a result, it hardened him. And just when he started to soften up, the situation with Leo brings him right back there. So he has to harden up again. And all that psychology, I didn't fully appreciate when I was younger. But now I definitely get it. And it's sad, it's tragic. You kind of wish he didn't go to such an extreme at the end. But at the same time, I get it. You're like, hey, I tried to do it the normal way. The normal way didn't work for me. So fuck it. I'm back to just being Frank on my own again. And this is where individuality and method come together. Because ultimately, I think those are the two most pronounced themes in Thief. And what makes it more than just like a heist film, more than just a crime film, is that it's ultimately a film about individuality and method. There's people that go their whole life never really knowing what they do best. I think everyone probably has something that they can do best at various levels, but through circumstances, through fate, through their background, they just maybe never had the opportunity to discover what they were best at. And especially as I've gotten older, I've decided that's probably one of the most important things in life, is living a life where you get to do what you're best at, even if you have to make sacrifices. And I've made sacrifices to do that because I feel what I do best is right. And I've created this whole life, this whole structure of how I live, which is different from how a lot of other, I guess you could say, more normcore people live, just to sustain this life so I can keep on being a writer. It's led to success, great success. It's led to failure, up again, down again. It's been a wild ride, and it's too much for some people. But it's the life I've resigned myself to. And this is also something that connects Thief with Heat, because Heat is about two protagonists who have resigned themselves to their jobs, essentially. Robert De Niro's character is a criminal, much like Frank in Thief, and Al Pacino is a cop, and neither can really sustain a normal romantic life as a result. But this is what they are, this is who they are, and this is just how they're going to ride out. I connect with these kind of characters because I've chosen to live a certain life a certain way. I don't think there's ever a day where Frank is not thinking about how could I be a better safecracker. It's who he is. It's where he shines. It's where he's most pure. He's just a man that just wants to do his job and get paid for it. And it's only when he wants other things that purity gets corrupted and it creates drama and strife for him. At the end of Thief, when we have that last shot of Frank striding off into the night after defeating his antagonist, even though he's alone, he is striding with triumph. It's a victory, and the music suggests that. You have this great Tangerine Dream guitar solo that was inspired by David Gilmour's great guitar solo in Comfortably Numb. It's a crescendo, it's rising, it's definitely presented in a triumphant way. Like another Frank Sinatra, he did it his way. While Frank's walking off into the night, it's like he might be alone, but he's not going to be a slave to even his weaker moments where he desires things that fuck with his otherwise perfect system that he has. Yeah, I don't know if that's something that would connect with a lot of people, but it connects with me. It's important to love what you do. It's important to do it well. I think there's value in that. I think there's spiritual value in it. When we recognize that in ourselves, we can become the best version of ourselves. And the best version of ourselves, much like Frank, is not necessarily a perfect human being. Doesn't mean you can't be flawed. Doesn't mean that there's other deficiencies and things that you're going to lose out on. But if the core essence of you is aligned and going in the direction that it just naturally wants to go into, and you keep growing, getting better and better at what you do from there, then I think everything else kind of fades off. Just like how Frank is just kind of this pure, unified individual again at the end of this film. It's like a snake that shedded its skin and now it's pure again. It's a profound film in a lot of ways. Like I said, I don't think Michael Mann, as great as some of his other films are, I don't think he ever topped Thief. And you should check this film out. Give it a watch. Definitely watch the Criterion Collection version if you haven't watched it. And just think about the things I'm talking about. And think about what it could say to you and what you can do to be the best version of yourself. And I think that's why it's a film that resonates and connects with me more and more every year as I become even more individualistic and get better and better at what I do. I just connect more and more with Thief. It's a masterpiece. Michael Mann's greatest film and masterpiece. Give it a watch. I'm Edwin Cannistraci, and as always, rock on.